My trip through Bangladesh was nothing shy of incredible, but there was one thing that kept on happening that I'd never experienced before, and I wasn't sure how to deal with it. But before I get back into my adventure through Bangladesh, I wanted to clarify something because some people have been curious. They've been asking me why I don't do the touristy things in these countries that I visit. And that's because of one reason. I like to be a traveler, not a tourist. I don't do all the fancy things. I don't stay in fancy hotels. I don't go to fancy restaurants. I try to travel as cheap as possible and experience the country as someone who's living there, because that is how I feel like I get to experience the most realistic aspect of what it would be like to be in this country. While there are a lot of incredible touristy things that are available in a lot of these countries I visit, it's not something that I'm curious in. Just in the same way when I'm in my country at home, I don't like to do touristy things. So let's get back to my adventure in Bangladesh. I was going south. I had purchased a ticket in Dhaka and I was going down to Chittagong. And it wasn't until after I purchased this ticket and I was on the train that I realized something might have happened in this purchasing process that was not what I had expected. You see, because of everything I'd experienced before and what I'd seen, I was expecting these trains to be packed to the gills full of people. But the train that I got onto was not. It was quite comfortable, it was quite luxurious, it was quite nice. There was space, there was plenty of room for people. And that's when I first started to think about what was going on. And it made me a little bit curious. But I had an amazing ride down south from Dhaka to Chittagong. And when I arrived in Chittagong, I was blown away. It was such a fascinating place to visit. And almost immediately I wanted to explore. I wanted to see what Chittagong had to offer. The markets of Chittagong were absolutely stunning. It was so fascinating walking through an open market, seeing all the different things that people were selling, the different restaurants, and I met some hilarious characters, some awesome people that chatted with me, that bought me tea, that offered me good deals on their produce or on their products. And the best part about it was that a lot of these people that I met were incredibly kind, incredibly nice, big smile, welcoming me with open arms. And a lot of the times they wanted me to take a picture of them. But as soon as I pulled up my camera, as soon as I went to take a photo, it was immediately back to business. They had straight faces and they hid all of their smiles. It was something that I found kind of funny, and as I'm looking back on all these photos, it makes it look like everybody was mad at me, but I promise you nobody was mad that I was taking a picture. And so I went further and further. I kept exploring these markets. I kept seeing more and more of what Chittagong had to offer, and I got pretty lost. I got pretty deep into the city, and at one point I saw this one building, and in this building only the top floor had actual insulation around the windows. The rest of it looked dilapidated and not used, run down, and this was fascinating to me. And right beside the building was stairs that just led straight up to the roof. There was no barricade, there was no signs that told me not to go, so I went for a little adventure. I walked up to the top of these stairs, and at the top of these stairs, I had my camera out and I was panning around looking at what was going on, when all of a sudden, someone came up to me, and they asked me immediately what I was doing there, what I was planning on doing, why I was filming, and I very quickly realized that right below me was a clothes manufacturing factory, and they didn't want me to film. Because if you know anything about Bangladesh, they'd had a lot of bad exposés recently about how they treated their workers, about how they treated factory workers, especially in the clothing and garments industry. So I think these people had assumed that I was there to film some sort of exposé or reveal this horrible truth about the Bangladesh garment industry.
What cost to the people who toil to make the clothes we want to wear? More than 1,000 workers were crushed to death. Moments earlier, they'd been churning out clothes for some of the world's biggest retailers.
But I just happened to walk into this building. But once I wandered down and I got to see the floor where everyone was working, and I got to chat with the people that were working, they didn't let me take any pictures or any photos. They didn't mind answering any questions that I had for them. Everything looked relatively good. Everything looked relatively clean. It seemed as though things were running smoothly. So on my way out, the security guard asked me to take a picture of him, and I went back onto my adventure. I wandered through a lot of Chittagong. I wandered through the nice parts of Chittagong, and I wandered through the poor parts of Chittagong, where people lived in a lot less established housing or less established buildings. But everywhere I went, everywhere I explored in Chittagong, I got to see how good the people were there. I got to see, no matter whether it was the nice business district or the poor side of the city, everybody treated me the same. Everybody wanted to share tea with me, share stories, and it was an incredible adventure. And I even got to go to a little cricket field. Now, I wasn't there for a match, but I met some young folk that taught me a thing or two about cricket. But then it was time for me to go to my next stop. Remember how my train ride in the beginning had been all nice and fancy and it had been really good? Well, this time I asked to ride on the cheapest possible transport. And this is where the battle buses really began. It had to have been one of the most fun yet scary and endearing experiences that I had in all of Bangladesh. Riding on these buses was an absolute trip. The bus drivers were not shy. There wasn't a single car that drove by this bus driver where he didn't challenge them by taking up the entire road and daring them to hit him. And a couple times there was some scratches and bumps on the bus. Luckily, I arrived in my next place in one piece, and that was Cox's Bazar. This is where something happened that I'd never experienced before, and I was very curious as to why it had happened here in Bangladesh. You see, when I arrived in Cox's Bazar, I was looking around for a place to stay, and I wanted to stay in a cheaper hotel. I wanted to stay somewhere that wasn't going to cost me an arm and a leg. And so on my way to the hotels, I met this young gentleman who wanted to help me out. He spoke fluent English, and he said he could help me find a hotel. So me and him, we went wandering through these hotels. And right on the edge of Cox's Bazar is one of the most famous beaches in Bangladesh. And along this beach strip is some fancy hotels, some really beautiful, really extravagant hotels. A place that I wasn't exactly curious in staying. But off of the main drag, there's a bunch of other hotels. And so we went to explore these hotels, and I'd learned something pretty quick. The first hotel we went to, they said it was full, there was an event going on, so we couldn't stay there. That was okay. And so I went to the next hotel. And in the next hotel, the only room available for me was the luxury suite, most expensive room they had to offer. And I tried to ask if they had a cheaper room. I tried to see if there was another option, but he said for me there was only the luxury room. And so we went to another hotel. And at this hotel, I started the conversation a little bit differently. I asked them what their cheapest room was that I could stay in. And the manager of the hotel showed me to a room. It was a fair price, and so I decided to stay. I put my bags in the room, I loaded everything in there, I closed the door, I got my key, and I walked down to the reception to sign the paperwork for the room. But once I'd gotten down to sign the paperwork, the owner of the hotel showed up. And even though this manager had promised me this room, I'd done everything except for sign the paper for the room, the hotel owner told me I was not welcome in his hotel. And this came as a shock to me because I'd had nothing but warm welcomes, warm regards in Bangladesh so far. And now all of a sudden, after moving all my things in, this hotel owner tells me I can't stay in his hotel. He told me there is no room for tourists. He does not want any tourists staying in his hotel. And this came as kind of a shock to me. I didn't really understand why he wouldn't want a tourist in the hotel. What was it that I brought that he didn't like? Did he not want me to leave a bad review, or did he not want me to stay at this place? Then I started to remember a few of the things. He told me that tourists weren't welcome in this part of town and that they had to go and stay at the touristy parts of town. They had to go stay where they had built these luxury resorts, where they had built these massive hotels. There was no option for me to stay at a different place. And while I understand that while they may have wanted me to experience the more luxurious side of Bangladesh, spending more money and helping support that economy, it also felt very strange that they didn't want me to stay in certain places, and they actually wouldn't even let me stay in certain places just because I was a tourist. But I wasn't going to let it ruin my Bangladesh trip so far. I went to the fancier hotel, I booked a room, I was only there for one night, so it wasn't the end of the world. And after that, I spent some time exploring around Cox's Bazar, because in only a few days, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh was going to be coming there, and there was quite a hubbub. There was a lot of action going on in the area in the days leading up to her arrival. But it wasn't my plan to see her come. It was my plan to go to St. Martin's to experience a Bangladeshi holiday in Bangladesh. But at the end here, if you are from Bangladesh and you've heard of this happening before, about tourists being denied places to stay because they're tourists, I would love to hear what your opinion is on that, and I'd love to hear what you have to say. Anyway, subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you guys next week for my last adventure in Bangladesh, the St. Martin Island.